The views and opinions expressed on this program are not necessarily those of this station, JVC Broadcasting Management, or its sponsors.
With so many people living longer, the fear of outliving your money becomes a reality for many of us. Will I be a financial burden? Will I outlive my money? How will I be remembered? My name is Neil Himmelstein, president of Main Street Planning Group. Please contact me by visiting mainstreetplanninggroup.com. That's mainstreetplanninggroup.com, or call 631-647-4694. I will introduce you to strategies that will guarantee you will not outlive your money, that can guarantee you will not be a burden on your loved ones. Through a collaborative approach, we will uncover solutions that offer tax-efficient strategies, lifetime income, and legacy planning, choice, organization, direction, and education. That is the code we stand behind. Contact mainstreetplanninggroup.com. That's mainstreetplanninggroup.com, or call 631-647-4694. And listen to me every Friday at 3 p.m. as I host the Main Street Code for Financial Success, right here on 103.9 LI News Radio. Good afternoon. Welcome to the Main Street Code for Financial Success. I'm your host, Neil Himmelstein. I'm here every Friday at 3 o'clock. And if you miss my show, you can always catch me on Spotify or Apple, or my website, themainstreetcode.com, where you can get past episodes and keep up to date. When we talk about our code, we talk about choice, organization, direction, and education. And we help hundreds of advisors across the United States, whether they be CPAs, attorneys, or other insurance professionals looking for insurance solutions. And we help you, the client, and people that have issues with your insurance needs, your legacy needs, your retirement needs, in the areas of life insurance, long-term care, annuities, and disability insurance. And today we are very fortunate to have with us Ron Roel. Ron is a veteran journalist and author. He's passionate about promoting successful aging, which is something we talk about outliving your income and all that quite a bit. Ron previously had written for Newsday in a blog in Act Two, and he's developed, his passion is on caregiving because he had a strong interest in supporting family caregivers, and a strong interest because he has been taking care of his mom with his 4 brothers for the last 25 years. I could go on and on about his thing. He volunteers with AARP. I mean, your resume is humongous. But I really wanted to focus today on why you got engaged with caregiving and what that's all about, because we share in that passion, and just talk a little bit about that.
Sure. So my brothers and I took care of my mom. Unfortunately, she passed away a few years ago, but it was a long journey. And it's a difficult one. It's as you know, it's a rewarding one. You feel like this is a parent, a mother or father or other loved one who's taking care of me when I was growing up. And so, a lot of people, as their parents get older, feel like, this is my giving back.
What was wrong with your mom?
Well, just she eventually had Alzheimer's.
Okay.
But she lived to early 90s, so it's. And people are living now, as you know, till 100 and doing quite well.
Right.
But as you get older, as you get into your 80s, the risk of dementia, increases dramatically. So that's what she eventually succumbed to. But she did well for a long time. And what we learned as a family, and increasingly, the more you talk to people, it's like, well, this is not a special group, family caregivers. It's every family gets involved in this, and as you know, Neil, it's something that you need a team. You can't do it alone. Mm-hmm. Even as a family, there are many things you can do, but there are things that you can't do, and things you could really use help doing, especially in the area of long-term care as you get older.
Did you live near your mom, or?
Yeah, fairly near. She was on Long Island, and so 2 of my brothers lived on Long Island with me, and a third lives in South Carolina. So that's another issue that faces a lot of families, that everyone wants to be involved. So I was kind of the lead person. So interestingly, my oldest brother in South Carolina was a doctor, mm-hmm. and so I would basically bring him in, with conference calls and say, listen, this is how you can contribute, because everyone wants to contribute,
Well, not in every family.
Right. That's true.
So, a lot of caregiving plays into family dynamics. And, every family is different.
Right.
My situation, my dad had disintegrated discs in his back and his neck, and my mom was his caregiver until she passed. And now my dad was on his own.
Right.
Living in Baltimore with 4 brothers, like you, but I have 4 brothers. You had 3 brothers.
Right.
Only 3 of mine were living, so it's kind of the same. But none of us live near Baltimore anymore. So I lived out on Long Island. My brother, who's a doctor also, lives in Massachusetts. I have another brother at the time lived in New Jersey, and one lives in Connecticut. So it added whole different dimensions as to how's Dad being taken care of. Now, my dad had his full mental capacity, but his physical capacity diminished to the point where he was in a wheelchair.
Right.
And his care was such a thing that we had to hire caregivers, particularly because medication, getting around, getting in and out of bed, going to the bathroom, and that communication from that caregiver was always a big deal, because we don't know this person really well. If we don't know what medicines he's taking, we can't help manage. And my father would self-medicate. My father was a veterinarian, and he was a morphine addict before he died, but he was happy.
Yeah. It's a challenge. It
Right.
really is, and especially, so this one, my first guide is for Long Island caregivers, because that's our area. I know it well. I know a lot of the resources, and so a lot of the local resources are important. People want local resources if they can.
Right.
But you point out, an issue that is sort of my next challenge, which is to provide what I call caregiving navigator, long-distance caregiving, because that's where a lot of situations occur.
It's not only that, but you find family strife in that if one child lives near the parent, and I know a very good friend of mine who's helping take care of his mother, running a business. His wife also has medical issues, and he's resentful towards his other siblings
Right.
who don't live in the area, who's not doing the care, and that caregiving, and I can go through statistics, that whether you buy insurance, you don't buy insurance, this caregiving element is expensive.
Right.
It's expensive from the sense, not just emotionally expensive, but financially. Being able to keep your job, and you have a fluid job where you're writing,
Right.
but for many people, they have to cut their hours, forego promotions, use some of their own funds, and typically, a lot of times it's a daughter. A lot of times there's not a daughter involved or a daughter-in-law who ends up sacrificing her time and her money, and which happened with my wife's case, and at the same time maybe neglecting the children at various stages. The family dynamics of this is humongous.
Exactly.
I mean, not only emotionally of course, but financially it's devastating.
Yeah. Yeah, it really is a challenge. And, in each, so in my navigator, I basically try to walk people through, since everyone's journey is different, but I give them a template. So basically, there's a preparation and planning stage, and there's aging in place independently. Then there's aging in place with some assistance. And then there's some, maybe you can't do that any longer, or you need to age in place in an assisted living, all the way to the end of life journey. So the issue also is not only is it challenging, but it keeps changing.
Right.
It's like, oh, wait, I thought we were here. Like, no, now we're here. So you have to be prepared for that change. And you pointed out, so there's actually a section in the Navigator called the sibling syndrome. And it's really an issue, and it's tricky because, as you point out, usually or often there is one sibling who was closer, and that he or she, as you point out, usually it's a she, the daughter, or a daughter who assumes more of the responsibility. And what this provokes is you need to have family conversations.
Thank you.
And they won't. I'm not saying they won't be easy, but you have to have them.
And continuous.
And exactly.
And I think in planning, preparation mitigates problems. Planning mitigates problems. Period, end of story. And if you're not having this conversation, not just with your spouse, if you're married, but with your children, so much of this can be minimalized and or avoided, and that's where a lot of insurance comes in. But that's where the planning takes place. And continual planning, okay, now I'm here, now what do I do?
Right.
So that's all huge stuff, and it complements everything we talk about on the show. And we're getting ready for break, but you're listening to the Main Street Code for Financial Success. I'm your host, Neil Himmelstein. My guest is Ron Roel. How can I get a hold of you, Ron?
Well, it's simple. It says Ron, RON.Roel, ROEL, @gmail.com.
Fantastic. And he has a new book out, and it's on Amazon called Caregiving Navigator. And we're going to talk more about the book in a minute. Where can they get this book, by the way?
Well, right now you can just get it on Amazon.
Okay.
I'm basically now trying to distribute in local bookstores as well.
Terrific.
So it's really newly launched.
Can't wait to read my copy. Thank you.
Great.
All right, we'll be right back. Welcome back to the Main Street Code for Financial Success. I'm your host, Neil Himmelstein. If you want to reach out to me, 631-647-4694. I'm here today with Ron Roel. Ron, how can I get a hold of you?
Just ron.roel, ROEL, @gmail.com.
Fantastic. And before the break, we were talking about Ron just published a new book called The Caregiving Navigator. It's available right now on Amazon. I highly recommend it, not only if you're in that situation or you're a child that has to do caregiving, or a sibling or a spouse. There's so many resources here on Long Island. Ron has put it all in a book form, which is fantastic. It's really well written and really comprehensive. And I know Ron is very active in the community because we keep bumping into each other without having met each other. It's really crazy how we haven't really gotten together before. We know a lot of the same people and everything else. Some of the things that Ron does over and above is not only is he on the Council of Aging, and we didn't talk about that, but he's also deeply involved with AARP. And talk about your involvement a little bit with AARP and what that's all about.
Sure. Well, I started off as a volunteer with them. I actually did some work for them in respect to caregiving. I also, they knew me from my work at Act 2 at Newsday. So they knew my interests. So I did start initially moderating panels for them on Social Security and Medicare, and then I became increasingly involved. I'm involved in there are 9 local chapters, so you can be involved as a volunteer. People think of AARP and they think of what they see on TV, which is the business side of AARP, which is insurance. But that's not my side. My side is volunteering and advocating. So right now, what I'm also on is the New York State Executive Council, which is a group of, advisors, volunteer advisors that they turn to in different sectors of the economy and healthcare. And so we meet and we advise, and I'm involved actually on some of the subcommittees for Governor Hochul's Master Plan on Aging. So it's a massive effort. It's a good one, but it's going to take a while, and it looks at all sorts of aspects of aging. What do people need? What are the resources? How can we make it better? How can we connect with the private sector? So it's just a recognition of what Neil, which is that we are aging.
Right, but you make a very interesting point because my role in NAIFA is we're having discussions with New York State from a different end. And that is the public-private partnership for long-term care.
Yes.
And there used to be, years ago, long-term care insurance is it's perceived as very expensive. We've had price increases, and in past shows I've said why. They didn't understand that 70% of all people reaching the age of 65 or older will need some sort of care in their home that the health insurance doesn't cover. That care includes any two of activities of daily living, whether it be bathing or dressing or getting around or feeding yourself or getting in the shower. These are all things that you come up against when you're caregiving, but who's paying for all this? And it's a huge expense. You can mitigate it I've been using that word a lot lately. I don't know why. It just, you can minimize that burden that you're potentially going to have. 70% chance you're going to need it. And I like Evelyn Carter's quote, because the other 30% take care of the 70%.
Right.
You're either being cared for, or you're a caregiver, or you're just a disinterested party, which is not good either. But I would say it affects 100% of us, and it affects our families in multiple generations. I mean, not just as the example I used before, not just my wife running around and taking care of her father, but with the 2 young kids, all of a sudden now they're affected.
Right.
And not only emotionally not having that care that they would normally want, but also financially. Where she can't work and she's got to do this, and it just puts a huge stress on everybody. So insurance is one option. But anyhow, New York State used to have something called a partnership of long-term care, where it was a private-public partnership. The unfortunate thing about it, and they don't have it anymore, but you may still have one of these policies, was they were trying to sell Cadillacs and Maseratis to people who could afford Fords and Chevys. And now the price is exorbitant, and they never came back to that private-public partnership. And many of the long-term care carriers, particularly in the state of New York, have left the state. So you're down really to 3 carriers, and it's become a very different world. So we're in tremendous conversations, because the default, if you go through all your money, the default person who handles your long-term care is Medicaid. And Medicaid essentially is welfare for the elderly. And whether your attorney tries to put you on Medicaid or you're going on Medicaid, you have to spend down your assets. I don't like to work with people that are poor. I like to work with people who are successful, but I also like to keep people successful and protect their assets. So long-term care options, whether it be a hybrid option or this option, all this plays as you're talking to Governor Hochul on the one side, and we got to get together on this. We're talking on the insurance side about how we can help as a public-private solution, rather than it being a full government solution. And the government has a vested interest in this, of course, because this is the largest part of not only the federal budget, but the state budget. Yeah, absolutely. So there's a financial interest in this, but as we're talking about this, there's also, as you point out, the family interest and a recognition. So I've had talked to some people about long-term care insurance, and sometimes we get pushback. You're like, okay, when you use the statistics about 2/3 of people age 65 will need some sort of care, they go, oh, you're just trying to scare people, or you're just trying to perpetuate a stereotype of people, frail, elderly. This is the reality of our life. Yes. So I am passionate about helping people successfully age and be as healthy for as long as possible. But this is an inevitability. And it doesn't mean that, it just means you need options, as you point out. And the further you go along and deny that, I have a phrase I call PDD, which is planning deficit disorder. That's my coinage. And that is the people, they don't want to think about it. I don't want. Nobody wants to think about it.
Yeah, but you have to think about it, because if you do think about it, you can be successful much longer, and you are trying to be healthy, but things happen, and increasingly too, as you point out, it's a multi-generational thing, and right now it's happening. One of the big trends is that now millennials are becoming caregivers. You thought, wow, really?
I get it. Yeah.
So it's every generation, and it requires all generations, and it requires families to think about what I call care partners. Who's part of your team? Your family's there, your friends may be there, but then professionals like you need to be there. You need to help them plan, and sometimes, your professionals are very useful if the family is at a logjams or in disagreement about what to do. You bring in financial professionals who can give you some objective advice.
And you don't want to just, a lot of people, I would say, there's a percentage of the people, they start getting in their 60s and they sit down with an attorney. An attorney's going to draft documents and may give you a plan, but they're not going to get into the nitty-gritty of how does this plan going to be accomplished? They get paid for documents. Not that attorneys are bad, but they're part of the solution, not the entire solution. Right. I tell attorneys that all the time. Let me look at, and sometimes people think, well, there's this huge expense to buy, say, long-term care insurance. Well, sometimes it's just a reallocation of what you're doing to protect what you have. It's not an expense. The expense is if you have to spend $300-400 a day for your care. Now, I wanted to get into something real quick because we're running out of time.
Okay.
How long did your mom have dementia and Alzheimer's?
Well, in graduate stages, about 10 years.
10 years. And that's an average. Now, over 50% of all long-term care claims, actually 51%, these are last year's numbers, I haven't seen this year, are due to Alzheimer's and dementia. 51% is due to your mind. It's not when you break a hip, it's when you start to lose your marbles. You've been listening to the Main Street Code for Financial Success. I'm so happy to have you here, Ron. How can they get a hold of you, Ron?
ron.roel@gmail.com.
Right, and you could buy Ron's book on Amazon. It's called Caregiving Navigator. I highly recommend it. Thank you. Have a great weekend, everybody. If you need to reach out to me, 631-647-4694. Have a great weekend, everybody. Thank you.
The views and opinions expressed on this program are not necessarily those of this station, JVC Broadcasting Management, or its sponsors.